Welcome to Toy Polloi.
Hello and welcome to another video from Toy Polloi, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the new wave of vintage Kenner style Star Wars figures released by Hasbro to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Star Wars Return of the Jedi. And they've just released 6 more figures in this line, of which we have the Emperor, the Biker Scout, Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight, Lando Calrissian in the Skiff Guard outfit, Leia Organa as Boushh, and then Han Solo in his Endor gear. And the plan is with this video is to take a close look at them carded, then we're going to open them all up and compare these figures to the vintage original figures to see how they stack up. So let's first take a closer look at the figures on cards and see what they're like and see how they compare to some vintage cards that I have in my collection. So here we have these 6 carded figures, and I think many of the comments I'm going to say in this video will be similar to what I've said in previous videos about the previous waves of these retro collection carded figures. The cards from a distance look pretty nice, but it's when you get close up you start to see how sort of cheaply done they are, and they've got the sort of faux aging, and they just sort of, I don't know, all of that adds up to make them not look great on card. I do much prefer the original ones. I can see why they've done it, because they're trying to differentiate these from sort of vintage original cards, but I think it just generally takes away from the look of them. If we take a look at this Han Solo Endor card, you can see straight away we've got the retro collection sticker. They've been sticking that on all of these cards right from the start. That is easily removed, so that's not a problem. A bit of lighter fluid and we can take that off. They've also got this sort of faux aging around the edge of this. On the previous ones the aging was exactly the same on every card. On this sort of wave they've changed it, so the aging is actually slightly different on every card, so they don't sort of repeat as you hold them together. You can see it's slightly different, and they're all slightly different. So I would say that's a slight improvement, because at least they don't look like a sort of cut and paste copy of cards. They have added this 40th Return of the Jedi logo in the corner. I wish that was a sticker that could be removed. It's not, it's actually printed onto the card, so you know, that one can't be removed. So you can remove that, but you can't remove that. I just generally don't like these things that have been added to the front. I know why they're doing it. Obviously they've got to, as I say, differentiate them, but I just don't like it. We've also got the sort of warnings and choking hazard type things, which are modern legal requirements, so they have to add that to the front. On the back, very little information. This I've always found disappointing. It'd be nice to have the pictures of the other figures you could get, even the figures from the previous waves. You know, like the original cards had a shot of all the figures you could collect. This doesn't have a great deal of information. It tells you the names of the figures in the middle. Everything else is sort of copyright and legal in multiple languages, so it's a really disappointing card back. And the card that they've printed this stuff on now, I'm going to say it's barely card. This is like thick paper. It is so thin and weedy. It really, yeah, I don't know, it just doesn't do it justice. They should have kept with a sort of nice thicker cardstock. This just feels very weedy. All the cards are much the same. They've used pretty similar artwork to the original versions of the cards. In fact, I'll do some comparisons in a minute. So the overall effect is they do look like vintage sort of cards. The print on them feels a bit dull. In fact, the Return of the Jedi logo feels very dull indeed. It should be a nice vibrant bright red, and it feels quite muted. And there are a few changes to the names. Some of the names have changed. So let me compare some of these cards to some vintage original ones I have, and you can see the sort of subtle differences there are. Let's start with the Biker Scout, which is a favourite of mine. So you can see this is the modern card. This is my vintage original. You can see there's a little bit of difference in the sort of colouring of it. I think that's probably because my card has faded slightly, but you can see how bright and vibrant the Jedi logo is compared to the one on this card. It just seems a little bit dull and a little bit sort of washed out. Otherwise they are much the same. The subtle difference is the TM that's next to the Biker Scout is on the bottom there, and it's in the top right there. There's more copyright information under the original Kenner logo. There isn't anything under here. And then we've got all of the sort of guff at the top, which is the legal stuff. Now ages 4 up was pretty much all you had to say on the original cards. On this one we've got choking hazards because he's got a small gun, and you can see underneath each figure there is this big sort of document which is just legal mumbo jumbo in every single language. If we turn the cards over, this is what I don't like. This card to me is fantastic because it gave you the opportunity to see what other figures you could get and what you needed to collect. This card just looks very boring. So there's the Biker Scout. Let's move on to the next one, which is the Emperor. So this is the modern Emperor, and here is a vintage figure on a recard. So this isn't an original card, but it's a recard. But even the cardstock used on this sort of reproduction card back is the right sort of thickness. It's nice, it's firm, it's got the shine on the front and the sort of the duller finish on the back. This one, as I say, just very flimsy. There's little differences in this. It's I think again it's just the trademark has moved on the logo, so you can see the trademark is at the bottom there and it's on the top on this one, but those ones are very similar indeed. Then we have Han in trench coat, and you can see again much the same here, but there is one major difference, which is the original one was called Han Solo in trench coat, and this is now called Han Solo Endor, so they have changed his name. I guess it makes more sense to collectors because they think of this as Han on Endor, but I quite like the fact this one just says Han in trench coat, so subtle difference there, but it is a difference. And the final figure I have to compare is Lando Calrissian Skiff Guard disguise, as I know him. The new figure here is just called Lando Calrissian Skiff Guard, so they've removed the disguise. Otherwise, everything is much the same. The blisters on these figures are a little bit larger as well, just because they have a separate insert to hold the figures in place. You can see in this one that the weapon is taped to the side of the blister. On this one it's now held in place, and that is the same for all of these modern cards. But overall they do look fairly similar. It's just these added sort of aging things and slight changes to logos and stickers and stuff. I just think it sort of takes away from the look of these, but I can understand why they've done them. So now we've had a look at those, let's open them all up and see how the figures compare to the vintage versions. Okay, and here they are all out of their packets, and I've just been sort of playing with them and arranging them just to get a shot set up. And my initial thoughts on them are they feel like Star Wars figures, but they feel like cheap knockoff Star Wars figures. They don't feel as good as the original ones. There's a lot of sort of bad paint applications. There's moulding issues. This Han Solo barely stands up. He's got such wonky legs. Princess Leia's much the same. So the overall feel of them is that they are sort of done on the cheap, but you know, they do look like Star Wars figures. So let's take a closer look at them and we will compare each one to its vintage original, and I'll point out some of the issues that I've found as I go along. But yeah, overall they look all right. I think it's when you get close up that you can see these are definitely modern versions of toys. They just don't have the quality of the original ones. So let's start with the Biker Scout, because that was always a favourite figure of mine, and straight away you can see it does look like a Star Wars figure. It feels slightly different. The plastic that's used is a little bit sort of stranger to the touch. You can see mine has slightly yellowed with age, and this modern one is pristine white. It's when you come down to things like paint applications that you can really see that the quality is just not there. If I bring in the new one, you can see around his face, especially around this ear, the paint has just been sort of splodged on. There's actually bits of it down his cheek there, and it just doesn't fit in the hole. It just seems really sort of poorly put on. There are also chips and stuff in the black paint on the back. You can see there's bits missing. It just seems like it's been sort of done on the cheap. The knee pads have also been painted on these original ones. You can see the paint goes around that, and that is white plastic. These kneecaps have been painted on, so they've painted all of that back and then they've painted white on top of it. Not quite sure why they would have done that, but it is a sort of subtle change. The feet underneath as well, you can see have changed slightly, because there's now sort of copyright information and a number printed on there, and the copyright information on the back of the leg has changed to say Hasbro. Overall, this is not a bad sort of recreation of that figure. He still holds the gun in a strange way. I've managed to get mine to hold it straight by rebending the plastic on that many years ago, but they always tended to hold the gun like this. The hands are just not quite big enough. In fact, you can see how small his little thumb is there, so when you put the gun in, it always holds it at quite a jaunty angle. So this one's not too bad. I think paint applications let it down. There's just paint splodges all over the place. And yeah, it's not bad, this one. I'd say probably the best of the lot. Luke Skywalker Jedi Knight doesn't seem right at all to me. Obviously, he comes with the cape, and the cape is actually not too bad of sort of recreation. It's got a little bit more sewing at the top, so it tends to sort of pull it together. But if we take the capes off both of these and have a look at the figure underneath, there's something wrong with Luke's face. You can see he's got quite a tan to it, and it's a bit thinner and just a bit strange. I'm not quite sure what they've done to it. It just doesn't sort of hold up. These things are digitally scanned, so they take an old figure, scan it in, and then that's how they make the molds for the new one. So it's never going to be as pristine as the original figure, but they could have at least tidied it up. It just seems a very soft mold on this one. He has much less paint on him, so there's a lot less errors on this figure, but yeah, it just looks a bit strange to me, this one. It's a very soft sculpt on it and doesn't quite sort of hold up to close inspection. He comes with a green lightsaber, same issue as the vintage figure, that the lightsaber fits quite nicely in his left hand, but when you put it in his right hand, it's really loose and sort of tends to fall out. The blaster is much the same. You can put that in, but it really doesn't want to stay in particularly well, so it does tend to fall out. What's it like in the other hand? We'll try that. Slightly better, so maybe he needs to hold that in his left hand, and we put the lightsaber in that one, but that is very loose as well, so he doesn't particularly want to hold his weapons. Yeah, I'm just not massively taken with this one. I think considering how easy Luke Jedi figures are to get, vintage ones, I think I'd still rather pick up a vintage one than this modern version. Probably the least interesting of this series of 6 figures is the Emperor. He is a very common vintage figure, incredibly easy to get just because there were so many of him made. He came carded, you could mail away for him. There's just loads of these around. So this figure doesn't really do that much for me originally, and this new version, you know, it's okay. Again, the scan is a little bit soft considering how little paint he has applied to him. They've even managed to sort of have paint errors on this one. I've got paint all up the arm of this one. You can see little splodges here and bits around his hand. So yeah, it just sort of tends to suggest these are done on the cheap. I think there are better fan-made versions of figures out there than these ones. They certainly put a lot more effort and quality control into them. This seems like it's done as cheaply as it possibly can. Not a lot to say about this figure. He comes with a cane. The cane as well is very soft on its sculpt. They've scanned it in, but it's lost all of the sort of the wood detailing that you get on the original one. It just feels, yeah, like it really is a duplicate of something, so it's not quite as good as the original. It's just a sort of slightly watered down reproduction. So here we have Lando in skiff disguise. This is my vintage original one here on the left, and the new version here. It's not too bad. It certainly does look like Lando. Again, the sculpt is very soft on it, especially on his mask. This feels really like it's sort of been, everything's been rounded off. All of the detail has gone from it. You know, it does work, but it just feels like it's not quite what it should be. Otherwise though, this is not a bad figure. There's a fair amount of paint application on this, and for once this one doesn't have any sort of particular sort of overspill on paint or marks on it. Nothing is particularly scuffed. So this one they've done particularly well on compared to the other ones that I've shown you already. It's just, again, not a very interesting figure. I think that's the problem with all of these Jedi figures. They're all quite easy to get, and this selection they've chosen, these 6 figures, feels a bit boring. We've got the same figures again compared to the last wave. So we've got another Lando, we've got another Han Solo, we've got another Leia. It would have been quite nice if they'd done maybe Wicket or a Gamorrean guard or something different to the sort of main characters that they're picking. So none of these characters really stand out to me as being that exciting. I think Jedi figures in general, especially vintage ones, are very easy to find still. So these are, yeah, not going to be that sought after by many people. But there you go, that's Lando in his skiff disguise. Now we have Princess Leia Organa as Boushh. I always liked this figure as a child. I think it was a pretty cool figure because essentially you got 2 figures in one. You got Leia, then you put this mask on, and you got this weird looking alien figure. I always really liked the fact that it just looks so different to other Star Wars figures, and it comes with this really huge weapon. The modern version is actually not too bad. The colour of it is slightly different. It's a bit more of a sort of biscuity brown, and the metallic paint finish that you got on the armour on the original one seems to have been ignored on this, so it's just been turned into sort of flat grey colour. Again, it's fairly soft on the sculpt. Everything looks a little bit washed out. If we take the helmet off, you can see my Leia looks fairly cross-eyed. If I bring in my original one, you can see that one's got quite a nice face on it. This new one looks a bit angry and a bit, yeah, a little bit cross-eyed, so something's gone wrong with the paint application there. The gun is not too bad. This is a very strange gun, as I say, and it's the only figure this comes with, so yeah, that's not too bad at all. She does have a little bit of a bent leg. My original one stands up really quite nicely. This one, the legs are a little bit wonky, so she's standing at quite a sort of jaunty angle. Again, I think that's down to quality control. All of the quality control in these figures seems to be lacking. I'll show you my Han Solo in a minute, because he has got really wonky legs and will barely stand up. And this one, yeah, just a little bit off. Overall, it's not too bad, but it's certainly not a patch on the original versions of these figures. And then finally, we have Han Solo in his trench coat, or Han Solo Endor as he is now known. This is not too bad a figure as you look at it like this. It comes with this nice trench coat with this bit of camouflaging on top of it, and that's quite a good recreation of the sort of camo that came on the original material. He comes with this blaster, which he can't particularly hold straight. You can see this one, it's holding it off again like in a jaunty angle, much like the Biker Scout was. But this one has really bent legs. In fact, I've had to bend his legs quite far back to get him to stand up. Let's take the trench coats off and I'll show you what I mean, because we can compare the two figures and you'll see how sort of wonky his legs are. Okay, so that's his outfit off, and you can just see that his feet are splayed out. They're bowed out really quite far. So this original Han, his feet are nice and flat, so when you stand him up, he does actually stand up. This guy, if I try and stand him up, you can see his feet are so sort of bent forwards and outwards, he won't actually stand up. I've been trying to get him to stand up for ages, and the only way to do it is to bend his body back, so it sort of counteracts the wonkiness in his legs. And this is all down to quality control. I think a lot of these have been rushed out, or they just don't check them. This one doesn't have bad paint application, it's just got wonky legs, so it's a bit disappointing when that happens. And I think, you know, with modern figures, it does tend to happen quite a lot. Maybe it's down to the plastics they use. These feel a lot firmer. Some of the earlier retro collection figures, when I reviewed them, you could see that the arms are really quite bendy. These are a lot firmer, in fact very much like the original figure in feel. But he's got very wonky legs. Maybe I can fix that by sticking them in some just boiled water and reshaping them. But you shouldn't have to do that straight out of the packet. These should stand up. That's the basic part of an action figure. Oh look, I got him to stand up, but he is really, oh no, he's really slanted forwards. It's quite disappointing when that sort of thing happens. Otherwise though, it's not too bad a figure. His hairline has changed a bit, and I think again that's down to the way these are scanned, because his face is a little bit thinner. The overall effect is there, but it just doesn't have the quality of the original ones. So overall, what do I think of these modern figures? I have to say they're not bad. As with a lot of toys these days, especially stuff that Hasbro and Mattel are putting out, the quality often lets them down. There's bad paint applications, there's sort of poor plastic use that means that things are slightly bent and slightly warped. But, you know, they're not bad figures. And when you compare the price of a Star Wars figure back in the 80s and the price of a Star Wars figure now, if you look at the comparison, as you know, what's a pound or what's a dollar worth then and what it's worth now, they're actually much the same price. So, you know, you can still get a figure a similar price to what you would have paid back in the late 70s and early 80s. But as I say, the quality of them is just not up to it. And I actually think of all of the figures that they've produced so far for the retro collection, these are some of the most boring. I know they want to go for main characters when they do the sort of first 6 figures for a movie. I would have much preferred, you know, a Wicket would have been really nice, an Ewok of any sort would have been really nice, a Gamorrean Guard, maybe some more skiff stuff. I think the Emperor is a particularly boring figure. But then when it comes to Jedi, there weren't that many Imperial figures released. We had the Biker Scout, I think there was the AT-ST driver. What else did they release? All of the others came in the last 17, so maybe there'll be another wave for the last 17 and we'll get some of those figures. They are worth getting though. If you want the nostalgia factor, it's nice to grab these. It's nice to have them on card, even though the cards aren't the greatest of quality. It's a cheap way of getting some of these older figures in a carded form. I just think they could have done better quality cards, better quality figures, better quality paint applications, and everything would have just looked that much nicer. These do feel like they have been done on the cheap, which I think is pretty much what I said for the previous 2 waves of the retro collection. They're nice, but they just feel they've been done cheaply. So it's a shame. They could have done a lot better with them. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, then please check out some of my other reviews of the retro Star Wars figures and other Star Wars toys. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the bell to be notified each time I upload a new video. And thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching Toy Polloi. Subscribe for more great videos. You can also follow Toy Polloi on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.